Welcome to the second of Bright Green's interviews with this year's candidates for the Green Party executive. We've already had one come out with Duncan Kerr, who's standing for Local Party Support Coordinator, and today we have the first of our Equality and Diversity Coordinator candidates. Before we get going with the interview, I just have one thing to ask of you, which is if you could scroll down a little bit and hit that subscribe button, it'd be massively appreciated. It doesn't cost you a penny, but most importantly, it means that you won't miss any of the interviews that we have coming up with any of the other candidates, as well as all the videos that we put out on Bright Green. So without further ado, I'll introduce our guest for today. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ashley Routh. Ashley, how are you doing?
I'm not bad. It's the start of Young Greens conference today. It's a very exciting day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll crack on hopefully with an easy one. So why are you standing to be the Green Party's next Equality and Diversity Coordinator?
Sure. Well, I've been on Equality and Diversity Committee since I was elected as LGBTIQA+ Greens co-chair, and it's given me a lot of feelings about the committee and about how people are represented in the party. I think what I've noticed is that there is a very common theme coming from every liberation group, which is broadly that we're not really being listened to. E&D committee is kind of a little nook of the party where we talk about various problems, but then it's often quite hard to get concrete action taken against them. It's been difficult to get things kind of on GPEX's radar thus far. We had Liz Reason and Mary Clegg come and attend one of our meetings, which was productive, but it felt at times quite hard to get heard, quite hard to get the issues we were raising taken completely seriously. I think there is a real design problem, a constitutional design problem with our party, which is that on a national executive, we just have an equality and diversity coordinator role, and only people who are on GPEX can speak at GPEX, which means you end up with one or two people trying to represent, a very rich tapestry of people and a lot of different views, and it's just not very practical. So what I would like to do is I'm making very central to my stand for E&D coordinator the idea that we should address that. We should look at exploring how GPEX works, or if there's a new constitution passed in the near future, whatever sort of body vaguely fills that role in the party. I think it's more appropriate that we should have an equality and diversity coordinator. That role should exist. I think that it should be more appropriate if that coordinator can coordinate rather than speak for and try and be the voice for. And so I think they should be empowered to invite representative members of various different liberation groups, special interest groups, as they see being relevant, into GPEX meetings to actually speak to the issues that affect them. I don't think that necessarily has to mean that everyone has speaking power in GPEX always. I'm sure some people probably wouldn't think that's a good idea, but if there is a topic being discussed in GPEX that is relevant to a liberation group, that is pertinent to have somebody there to speak to those issues, I think we should just have somebody from their representative committee, or otherwise somebody who can speak with passion, speak with knowledge, speak with experience on the issues that they face, rather than simply trying to brief the coordinator to go and speak for them, because past coordinators have done a great job doing that, and it's a system that can work. And it's more authentic to be able to hear from the mouth of the people that are affected, and also it enables a back and forth rather than simply a relay of information. GPEX don't exactly meet every week. They're not constantly in back and forth communication, and so if it's a relay of information between the E&D coordinator and the rest of GPEX, then a simple conversation can take months to conclude, which is, it's the snail's pace of the party sometimes, but it means that really serious issues are effectively falling to the wayside because they take so long to actually even discuss.
So, in terms of those really important issues, where do you think that the Green Party needs to improve when it comes to issues around equality and diversity?
I think that given that we are presumably still on the cusp of a major constitutional review and a constitutional change and a sort of restructuring of the party, I think we're in a really, really unique, really rare time where it's an opportunity for us to re-examine our internal biases. I think as a party, we are institutionally discriminatory at times, which doesn't necessarily mean I think that there are people in the party who are by design making the party hard to access for certain people. But we all have to examine our own biases, and anyone who is managing an organization as big as this, anyone who's trying to design an organization as big as this through a constitutional review, they all have biases, and we all don't realize our own biases until somebody else points them out. I think that we should look at how we run conferences. Is it accessible? There have always been conversations about how accessible physical conferences were, because people were having to not only physically attend somewhere, not only have to deal with large crowds, manage potentially very crowded meetings and debates, but also there's a cost element involved. You have to physically transport yourself there. For most people, that involves paying for trains, that involves paying for hotels. It can be a very expensive thing. And so I don't think we've ever had a conference where we haven't disenfranchised a lot of our members. The layout of GPECs even, this is a really important body for the management of the party. But these aren't paid roles, and I'm not suggesting that we can necessarily afford to just start paying every GPEX role, but we have to understand the biases that creates. It means that people who can't afford to do something that is anywhere between a part and full-time job for free are disenfranchised in a way in the party. There's all these different kinds of biases, and I think if we're looking at a constitutional review, we're looking at the way this party runs, and if we are seeing ourselves as a party that is about to break through in politics, we're improving year on year. We've had a huge gain in councillors. There are some really interesting seats now where, based on like percentages of votes in local politics, in local elections, those are seats that we could seriously challenge for to win. I don't think we're going to be a one seat in Parliament party for very much longer. I think we're going to grow. I think, the next 10, 15, 20 years for us are going to be really, really important. We have to get things right, because these institutional problems, these design problems, they are going to haunt us if we don't fix them, if we don't address them. So I think now more than ever is a really essential time for us to actually talk to our liberation groups, to hear from them, and to ensure that they are really involved in the process of talking about the future of our party, the direction of our party, and the design of our party, to try and make us more representative of everybody, more representative of our membership, more representative of the country.
So you started off there with quite a strong charge that you leveled against the party there. You described it as institutionally discriminatory. When you say that, are there specific demographics that you believe the party to be institutionally discriminatory towards? And what would you, as Equality and Diversity Coordinator, want to do to overcome that?
To be honest, I think that to different degrees, in different ways, the party is institutionally discriminatory against all of our liberation groups. I think it's why those liberation groups have come to exist. We didn't we didn't throw darts in a dartboard and decide which liberation groups come to exist. You know, one of the factors that I think actually is a really good part of our design as a party is that we can introduce new special interest groups onto E&D committee, and we have done over time. The scope has changed, and that has allowed groups to form and to come to E&D and to raise issues with us that hadn't been heard before. And so I think all of those groups have really, really valid cause for concern. It's been said in so many elections that our party is, you know, it's very white, it's very middle class. It at a time was extremely dominated by men. It still is, I think, to a large point, although, you know, we are, I think, slowly improving there. I think Green seniors, I think Young Greens, I think Green Party women, I think LGBTIQA plus Greens, disabled Greens, Jewish Greens, like every liberation group, I think, Greens for Animal Protection, they all have very real, very legitimate grievances within this party. We hear them at E&D every single month, and then quite often that's the only place they are heard in the party. It's the only place they gain real traction. And I think if we opened up that conversation, we made it a wider conversation, we made the wider membership aware of those biases, maybe we could actually start tackling them.
And I wanted to pick up on one specific area that you mentioned there. So for a lot of people outside of the party, and a lot of commentary that you see on the party, there is a perception that often gets picked up that the Green Party has a whiteness problem, that the membership, the leadership, the narrative, the voter base is overwhelmingly white, and we have a race problem in the party. So obviously, as Equality and Diversity Coordinator, one of the key things that you'll be responsible for is addressing these kinds of things. So how do you see yourself addressing that whiteness problem if you think that it is there? Yeah, what would you like to see practically happen in that regard?
Sure. I mean, elephant in the room, I'm white. I'm a part of that problem. I think this is why it's absolutely essential that we transform this role, that we make this role about facilitating rather than speaking for, because speaking for is so often speaking over or becomes speaking over. If I was elected, then I would defer to Greens of colour. I would want Greens of colour speaking in GPEX. I would want Greens of colour speaking to GPRC. There are a lot of quiet conversations that happen in this party. I've had, you know, senior party members message me to quietly ask me X, Y, or Z about an LGBTIQA plus concern. And while that dialogue is healthy, I think it's almost a symptom of what's wrong in the party, that those conversations tend to be quiet conversations that happen in the background and usually just happen based on people's networking skills, based on whose contacts they've got, whose email they've got, whose phone number they've got, whatever. I think that it's really important that we have Greens of colour able to speak on GPEX. I think it's really important that anyone in a management position, both in the national party and in the local parties, knows where Greens of colour are, and is actually thinking to speak to them and is actually hearing them when they reach out. I think it's the only way that we can start addressing the representational problems in our party, is to hear from the people that aren't represented. So I don't plan on trying to solve, you know, the whiteness representation problem personally myself. I don't think I'm not the hero to save the day. I think I'm a person who recognizes that the only way we can do that is to actually listen to the people that it affects, to empower them, to give them the seat, the pedestal, you know, give them the megaphone, however you want to put it, I want to hear from them, and I want to hear from them all over the party. And I think my job as E&D coordinator would be to make sure that that is happening. I would be coordinating, not speaking for or speaking over.
I wanted to move on to something which you've kind of introduced there quite neatly, which is local parties. So obviously we've talked primarily about stuff at a kind of central level within the party, but the issues that are present within the centre often are also present in local parties. So what's your assessment at the moment of where local parties are at with regards to the kinds of issues that we've been talking about? And what would you want to see, what support would you want to see to be given to local parties to enable them to do better on issues around equality and diversity?
I think there's a massive disconnect between the National Party and the local party at times. I have in the past described the Green Party as a group of really effective local campaigning organizations, sort of barely held together with cardboard and glue and a skeleton crew at national level. And it can be very, very hard to balance those things out. I think, honestly, a lot of local parties have the same design problem that the National Party has, which is to say, let's stick an equalities and diversity officer role on our local executive and call that representation and call it good. And in practice, it very rarely is. I think that one thing, something we've done as LGBTIQA plus Greens, which I think is a positive step, at least for us, was we are reaching out to local parties who express interest in it and offering training, just a simple briefing on sort of, the relevant issues in 2021 that affect LGBTIQA plus people, the relevant legislation, the relevant things that the government is doing. It's big news, Liz Truss talking about conversion therapy, but not a lot of people know the nuts and bolts that are moving behind that. Not a lot of people know that we've had conversations with LGBT plus conservatives about how Liz Truss is effectively not picking up their calls and is talking to a lot of very questionable groups. There's all this context that just isn't known a lot of the time. I think if we can create a dialogue between local parties and the representative groups, if we can break E&D groups out of the sort of the prison cell that is E&D committee, where we're all having a lovely time talking about the various issues that affect us, but we're all just kind of bouncing off each other. I think if we can elevate ourselves within the party, not necessarily to higher degrees of power, but to higher degrees of visibility, that hopefully local parties in and of themselves will be able to reach out and to ask pertinent questions. If you have a local party that has you have a local party that has councillors and they're all white, and they obviously are going to have biases, they're obviously going to make oversights. It would be great for them to be able to reach out. I think local parties should be talking about where they're meeting, is it accessible, who are their membership, are they representative of their local area, is there something coming up in their local council that is actually relevant to a liberation group, and if so, are they making sure to talk to that liberation group before trying to write policy or trying to debate policy or trying to vote yes or no on policy. I think creating that kind of dialogue does a few things. One is it strengthens the local parties. One is it improves the level of confidence that liberation groups have that we're actually being heard. And also, I think it serves to address that disconnect between local parties and the National Party. It lessens that drift, because one thing I think has happened over time is that the National Party has become very labyrinthine. And there's plenty of people who do absolutely loads in local parties and are very aware of the local issues, very aware of the local politics, the local landscape, but that couldn't necessarily tell you the difference between GPRC and GPEX. And I don't hold that as a fault. It's a design problem with the party, but maybe if we've got increased dialogue between representational groups, between local parties, than the representational groups who have to navigate the labyrinth of the internal national party can help local groups to do that. You know, local group wants to make something green policy and they want to ask a liberation group about it. Great, liberation group can go over it with them, but can also potentially show them the ropes, bring them into conference. Here's how to write a policy. Here's how to get it accepted by SOC. These are all skills that are really important to represent your local party. That, you know, some local parties just lack those skills because it's very hard to do. I lacked those skills until, you know, they became absolutely necessary for me a year or two ago. And I've been a Green Party since 2010. So I haven't known the ins and outs of the National Party for most of the time that I've been here. And I think that's pretty typical within the party.
So I wanted to move on now, because obviously, whilst you are standing for a specific post, which is the Equality and Diversity Coordinator, you're also standing to be a member of the wider executive. So I wanted to delve into a few kind of broader questions. And the first one I wanted to put to you is, what do you think the biggest opportunities and challenges that are facing the Green Party at the moment?
I think the big question, you know, big image is, do we have a looming general election? You know, I assume everyone has probably read John's resignation message by now. And John seems to think there is a general election looming. And I think I agree. And I think a lot of other people do agree as well, that we could be looking at a general election in perhaps 2022, 2023. We have to be in a position by then that we are ready to be a parliamentary party that isn't just one person. Caroline Lucas does great work, but by being a one-person parliamentary party, one, she's very easy to ignore for the other parties. Two, she can effectively manage the parliamentary party herself because she is the parliamentary party. But I think when we get to a position where we've got 2, 3, 4 MPs, I think those are all realistic projections for the next general election if we, you know, we deploy ourselves in the right ways. There's going to be an actual conversation between our MPs. There's going to be a conversation about what our next steps are. How are we going to plan to defend those seats in the following general election? What are the new areas that we're strong in that we can hope to build? We can start to try and build momentum. We need to make sure that our parliamentary party in particular, and our councils as well, if we're in control of even more councils, are saying the right things, are managing themselves, are behaving like a big league political party, because we have to sharpen up our skills there, and we have to do it very, very quickly, because the reality is that if we get to a point where we're on that cusp, we've gained some more MPs, we've gained control of councils, and if we're still making gaffes, if we're still not representing people, if we're not thinking about how we function as a party, we're going to get found out very, very quickly. And when we get found out, it'll make news. And when it makes news, people will lose faith in us and we'll just roll backwards. And all the decades of work we've put in to get to where we are now could be squandered. And also potentially the window to get Greens in government before, you know, it really is too late, could be lost. So I think it is of absolute paramount importance. For me, I would never ever leave the Green Party. Like, the Green Party has always had policies that I've agreed with more and policies that I've agreed with less, and that will always be the case because that's the nature of being a political party. But the Green Party is the only party putting the environment first, and the clock really is ticking. It's been ticking for a very long time. You know, in some ways it's already too late, and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. I think we have to be ready for when the British public sort of help us break through, really break through, where we're getting in a position where we're talking about coalitions, when we get into a position where I genuinely think we could form a government in my lifetime, And we have to be ready for that. There will not be a second chance. There will not be a second opportunity, and we don't have time to screw it up. So I think it's of paramount importance that not only we've got the environment front and center, but that we are behaving like a functional party, that we are a functional party, and that we have a full, complete, rounded manifesto that's, it's backed up by science, that it puts the environment first, it puts social justice at the forefront. We have to get there, and we have to get there really quickly. I would like us to get there within 2 years. And I think that as a voice on GPEX, I can help us get there, or I hope so.
So on that last point, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, in the current political context where you have, the Tories kind of day by day moving further to the right, the Labour Party moving much further to the right than where it was just 18 months ago. I mean, who knows where the Lib Dems are sitting? Where do you think that the Green Party should be positioning itself politically in that context to deliver what you've just described?
It's an interesting one, because I almost think we've hit this strange spot where just looking at the political spectrum on a left-right basis, it actually makes it quite hard to analyze. Like, the Conservatives have been moving to the right in a lot of ways, but they've also been moving in directions that you might see as more left-wing in different ways, and they've made up and down movements. I would describe the Conservatives as populist right-wing rather than predominantly right-wing before anything else. I think the Conservatives are chasing headlines, are trying to chase after things that they think matter to people. And allowing themselves to be sort of dragged all over the political compass in doing so. And I think that Labour is following behind them. And so I think we have this situation when either Conservatives nor Labour are actually particularly consistent or particularly reliable. I've talked to a lot of Labour activists who just see Labour solely as better than the Conservatives. They've gotten very entrenched. It almost feels like American politics. I feel when talking to Labour supporters and Labour voters, is that they go, it's Democrats and Republicans. We've got to vote for the Democrats because they're terrible. The Republicans are awful. I was talking to somebody who's a Labour supporter, who actually was a Labour supporter at the time and has since left the party. And I asked, what do you want from Labour? Because they'd made a list of people they think could be the next leader, and it was a list of people that are wildly ideologically divergent, and I didn't really understand. What are you looking for? Are you looking for a more left-wing leader? Are you looking for a more right-wing leader? Are you looking for a Leave leader, a Remain leader? You're all over the place here, and they didn't have an opinion on the political views they wanted their leader to represent. They didn't. It wasn't on their radar that they wanted Labour to be more left-wing or more right-wing or more populist or more libertarian. They were just cycling through names that they think could reinvigorate the Labour brand enough for people to vote for them. And I said, okay, well, what policies do you think Labour should adopt? And they said, I don't know, I'm not a leadership candidate. I don't think we need to think of ourselves as a party that's positioning ourselves as hard left or centre left or particularly libertarian or particularly authoritarian or anything like that. I think we need to think of ourselves as a party that is internally consistent. We are a party, and one of few parties, and this really worries me about British politics, that broadly speaking, we think we understand. I don't want to sound arrogant here. We think we understand the issues that the country needs to make the forefront issue. And if people on the doorstep don't want to hear it, we don't, as a party, see it as our job to just let go of that policy. If we talk about the environment on the doorstep and 9 out of 10 people say they don't care, that doesn't make us stop caring about the environment or stop prioritizing the environment. Whereas I feel that with Labour and with the Conservatives, it does. And so you end up with these two parties just chasing themselves in circles. Whereas I think the thing we do and the thing we can do very, very well is to actually try and change people's minds rather than to chase people's minds. The environment is the central, most important thing facing the country and facing the planet. And if people aren't interested in hearing it, we need to make a better case for it, not stop talking about it, because it's coming whether people want to talk about it or not. I think, I can't remember which celebrity it was that said, vote green because you'll never feel bad about having voted green in the future, you know. I think that's true, and I think we should lean hard into that. We've always been consistent. We've always had this message, and whether people want to hear it or not, you know, how much of an uncomfortable truth it is, we have to talk about the environment and we have to act. And I think that's how we should position ourselves, as consistent and on message, and the people actually saying what needs to be said, not just trying to tell people what they want to hear. You know, we are people who dispense a really uncomfortable truth about the world. And I think that's our role. I don't think it's to be particularly left-wing or particularly centre-left or particularly right-wing or anything like that. I think our job is to be consistent, because there are very few parties that are at the
moment. I guess just to challenge you on that a little bit. I guess you've talked about the kind of scale of the crisis we're currently facing with regards to the climate and with regards to the kind of ecological crisis. And then at the same time, you're saying, well, we don't need to position ourselves as a particular position on the political spectrum. Now, the one criticism of that would be that, well, the scale of the crisis that we're facing demands a radical overhaul of our economic system, which is an inherently, anti-capitalist left-wing project, and so therefore, intrinsically, the task that we are facing is a task of essentially left-wing socialist struggle to tackle the climate crisis. But at the same time, you're saying there that we shouldn't be necessarily positioning ourselves as quote unquote far left or centre left or whatever else. So what do you make of that?
I mean, I'm a socialist myself. I'm pretty far left as far as things go. And while I recognise that I think an eco-socialist vision is the best possible vision, and in the long run, the only viable vision, I think the reality is that we are not in a position yet in British politics where the conversation is what brand of environmentally responsible governance is the best one. I'd love us to be there, and I want us to get there, but I think that is an enormous luxury. You know, there are, along the political spectrum, all different kinds of ways that you can approach environmental policy making. I think a left-wing one is the best one. I think a socialist one is the best one. I think it's the most likely to succeed. You know, I don't think we are necessarily just going to fix the problem with environmental tax perks or something like that. But let's be honest, in 2021 in the UK, the reality is that the conversation is so far out of public discourse that even getting people talking about those kind of soft policies that at best a gateway to the action we need would be a huge benefit. It's not, I don't think we need in the long run a left-wing socialist vision, but I think we have to walk before we can run here. And I think it's easier to sell people on the bigger picture problem of we need to make policy about the environment. And if we can get them to go, yes, you're right, then we can go into, let's have a conversation about what brand of environmental policy is going to be best. How much do we restructure society? How much do we restructure the economy? How do we best achieve that? I want to get people there, but first I have to get people to agree that they need to talk about the environment. That is job one, and I don't think we're there yet.
I guess I'd push back on a little bit of that. I mean, if you look at the research and the studies and the polling on these kinds of things, if you look at, for example, the polling that's done on what are the issues people put at the forefront of their mind when they're voting, if you look at levels of concern around climate change, all that sort of thing, there's been a marked shift in the last decade, in the last 5 years, really, on that issue. And I guess in addition to that, you've also got consistent polling and studies that have shown that the kinds of transformational policy and programs that are what I would see as kind of central to the Greens vision and central to a left Green vision. Things like, for example, renationalisation of public transport, public and community ownership of energy, a 4-day working week, the universal basic income. All of these things have time and time again been shown to be hugely popular with the electorate. So I guess I'd ask you to reflect on that in relation to what you just said there, which is that I guess that the public aren't quote unquote ready for that kind of transformational program.
I mean, yeah, I can speak to that. I don't know if you've ever stumbled across Vote for Policies or similar websites. The basic premise that they remove parties' policies from the party name and the party logo, and they basically show you every party's policy on a different area, and you vote for which one you think is best, and it tells you at the end of the quiz, which parties you agree with on which issues and which party you agree with the most. Over the last few election cycles, the Greens have been consistently extremely popular on those, in most cases the most popular, and Labour have also been extremely popular, and left-wing ideas have been overwhelmingly popular. In the 2017 general election, when asked about policies on the door by pollsters, people preferred Labour's policy to the Conservative policy, and then when asked how they planned to vote, they voted Conservative. I agree with you that most people would benefit from and would support real left-wing socialist policies, but the policies that people prefer, for some reason, don't translate to votes. Labour are not in government. We have one MP. We have the most popular policies and have done for a long time. Labour have very popular policies and have done for a long time. It hasn't helped. I don't think that there is a direct one-to-one causal connection between the policies people like, and this, I realize, sounds absolutely wild, but I don't think there is a direct one-to-one causal connection between the policies people like and the parties they vote for. That is a symptom of how broken this political system is, I think. And so while I agree with you that, yes, people are broadly in favor of socialist policies, 4-day weeks, real serious reconsiderations about how we change the economy, UBI, things like that. I support all of these policies. And I think if we're in a position where we can actually join a government and where we can actually, have conversations about policies to put forward, then I definitely think those are the policies we should be putting forward. But at the moment, parties ride into Parliament or ride into the rocks purely based on people's image of their brand, not based on their policies. And so I think we have the best manifesto of any political party in the country. I think we have the best manifesto by a very long shot. And I've thought that was the case for a very long time, for my entire adult life. It's why I've always been a member of the Green Party. But I have to face facts and I have to deal with the reality, which is that since 2010, we haven't grown as a parliamentary party. It's one MP. It's just one MP and that's it. And so we have to consider the rather uncomfortable reality that our overall brand, our overall image, the way people perceive us in a wider sense, is actually potentially more important to our political life, our political flourishing in a lot of cases, especially outside of local politics, to us actually breaking through in Parliament. So I don't disagree with you that those issues are important and that people value them. I just don't think that is reflected in the ballot box. I don't know why.
So we'll leave that conversation there for another day because we could have it at length. But I wanted to ask you a couple of questions before we finish on what's been happening on the executive in the last few weeks and the stuff that's come out in the last few days. So in the last 6 weeks, we've had 3 members of the executive resign, plus Jonathan Bartley resign his position as co-leader, and now Sian Berry saying that she's not going to be standing for re-election. What do you make of all that in terms of the current context on the executive? What's going on there? And I guess you're seeking office to a body that one might describe as being in a slight state of chaos at the moment. So what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I'm trying to run into a house that's on fire, for sure. I think that there is a really, really toxic culture in GPEX right now, for a number of different reasons. And I think that GPEX is, from what I've seen, the most hostile, the most unfriendly, and in many ways the most uncooperative body I've ever seen in this party. And I've been around a few different local parties. I've been around the country. I've been around for a while, and I genuinely think that GPEX is incredibly toxic. I think that there are a lot of people who have started to play politics and vie for control via having the largest clique on GPEX. And I think it's caused a lot of these sort of factional divisions. I mean, GPEX has always really had quite a high turnover. I'm not sure I've ever seen a time where the listed GPEX members on our website has ever been completely accurate, except for in the weeks immediately following a GPEX election. It's inevitable that people resign. It happens all the time, and it's a problem with GPEX, and it's one that's gotten worse recently. I think we have a lot to answer for in how undemocratic GPEX can be sometimes. We survived for a very long time with things hidden under wraps. We survived for a very long time without a deputy chair being assigned when there should have been. There have been multiple legal challenges against the way GPEX has behaved. I don't want to point fingers to any individuals, because I don't think it necessarily helps to do so. But I do think we need a very, very wide scale change to GPEX, because I think that it's like changing schools. Like you go to a new school and you can build a whole new life for yourself, right? You meet new people, do new things. I think if we change GPEX by inch, it's going to be very, very hard to address that toxic culture in GPEX. I think if we have a significant upheaval in the membership of GPEX, that we maybe stand a reasonable opportunity that a large number of new people coming in fresh and from other areas in the party, maybe those people will be equipped to identify this toxicity and to address it, and to ensure that they're not falling into cliques or factions or whatever it is that has been rocking GPEX. I think there should be an honest and open conversation about what's happening on GPEX. And I've spoken to GPEX members about challenging decisions that have been made, about questioning decisions that have been made. And by more than one GPEX member, I've been brushed off as well. It's all in the minutes. And it's like, well, yeah, it is in the minutes that are hidden on a tiny little corner of the website that nobody ever visits, that nobody ever reads. GPEX meetings are open to observers, but most members have no idea when they take place and where they take place. GPEX is labyrinthine and is inaccessible. And I think that there are a lot of people who hide behind the fact that people are technically allowed to observe GPEX meetings and are technically allowed to read the GPEX minutes as a sign that they're transparent. And I think that's ridiculous, because you are not being transparent if you put your minutes somewhere where nobody can find them. You are not being open to people if you are actively encouraging people to attend and observe and simply offering out the information where it's asked for. If people have to jump through hoops to even find out where and when you're meeting, if people have to jump through hoops to find your minutes, if they have to do it through our website, which is in many cases falling apart, whenever I use the website, every 3 pages I navigate to, it suddenly decides I've logged out and tells me I need to log in. Then I click login and it decides I'm still logged in and don't need to log in. It's a really badly designed website. I'm sorry to say, it's not fit for purpose. Most people don't know how to navigate it. Most people don't know it exists. Most people don't know how to find information on it. And so GPEX is this shadowy group that has huge influence on the party and is almost answerable to no one, both constitutionally and like practically. Obviously I stood for chair last year and I was talking about a lot of these things last year. Nobody knows what's going on in GPEX, and GPEX are making some very questionable decisions. There was something said at the last GPEX meeting, which is that SOC had offered an opinion that GPEX had once again failed to follow policy, failed to follow the due process in terms of our spokesperson appointments, because that's obviously the hot topic at the moment. And it was said in GPEX that SOC are free to make rulings, but we aren't bound to follow them. And that's technically accurate, but what kind of situation are we in when our national executive is just ignoring constitutional rulings, is ignoring our constitution, is allowing themselves to overrule other bodies of the party that they're not really empowered to do so, but they're technically the upper echelon of management of the parties. They do it anyway. GPEX shouldn't be interfering in disciplinary matters. GPEX shouldn't be overruling decisions of other parties. GPEX shouldn't be ignoring SOC. The level of arrogance that has been expressed on GPEX in the last year or two is mind-boggling to me. It's genuinely appalling, I think. And I think we need a serious foundational change in GPEX to tackle that.
So I have one final question, one final serious question for you, and then I've got a slightly less serious one to finish on. Sure. So you mentioned it there, the recent dispute around the appointment of Green Party spokespeople. And Sian Berry, in her statement, which she issued earlier this week, setting out why she wouldn't be restanding for the leadership in the by-election that's coming up shortly. She said that she felt that she could no longer be in the role because of the inconsistency she felt there was between the party's policies in support of LGBTIQA+ rights and the appointment of certain spokespeople on that list. She since this morning fleshed it out in somewhat more detail in an interview in Open Democracy. I guess the question I wanted to put to you was, obviously, the reason for Sian not restanding is an issue of quite clearly something that relates to your role or the role that you're standing for as Equality and Diversity Coordinator, and a responsibility of GPEX, i.e. the appointment of spokespeople. So what do you make of this situation, and how would you see yourself being able to square that quote unquote inconsistency that Sian has referred to?
Sure. There's a few factors at play here. One is there is somebody whose job it is to assign those spokespeople. I would question whether having one person assign spokespeople is a particularly good way of managing it. And then GPEX sort of signs off on that decision. That was devolved to a group of, I think, 4 people who were just sort of picked at random by the person who was supposed to make the decision. I think that was a mistake. The list itself of spokespeople was just presented to GPEX for rubber stamping and was rubber stamped without being discussed. I think that was a mistake. And I think there were a lot of other mistakes along the way. I don't think, as a political party, that it makes political sense to assign somebody to a spokesperson role if it's going to cause massive negative press. And this isn't about anyone's particular views. It's about functioning as a political party, because that spokesperson appointment should have been a really amazing opportunity to put people front and center to talk about certain policy areas. A big problem we have in the party is that the media will only talk to one of like 3 people because that's the only people they know. The reason we have these spokespeople roles is to elevate people, to put people who are really passionate about specific policies, really knowledgeable about certain policies, forward to speak about those policies. and it got completely overshadowed by the backlash about a certain member being appointed. And I think that's the more important issue. I don't think it's necessarily absolutely essential that all of our spokespeople or of GPEX politically agree on the same things. We're a party where we disagree on things. You know, Greens for nuclear power exists in direct challenge to our policy. Greens for HS2 exists in challenge to some of our policy. It's very normal to disagree, but it is not sensible to assign people who are going to dominate the news cycle and completely destroy the benefit of assigning spokespeople in the first place, which is to lift them all up and generate a conversation about all these new people. You know, I feel really bad for most of the people that were assigned a spokesperson, because, you know, something else became the headline, and the moment that should have been allowing them to stand forward and speak about the policy areas that they've been chosen for was just completely destroyed. I think it's just bad politics to do that. I think it's an amateur move, and I think it's a good example of why, as a party, we are in many ways behaving like amateurs. And I think we're going to continue to, you know, perform poorly in national elections if we keep doing that. I don't think Sian should have resigned. I don't think it was her responsibility. I think ultimately Sian has resigned over the failures of GPEX more widely. I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't think she should have resigned over it. I certainly wouldn't have expected her to resign over it. Well, I suppose she hasn't resigned, but declined to restand. I think we should change how we assign spokespeople. I think we should have a wider conversation about it. I think it should be more accountable. I think GPEX should talk about it. And actually, as LGBTIQA plus Greens co-chair, we reached out to GPEX and asked if we could be told who the spokesperson list was before it was announced publicly. And the reason we did that is we wanted to know if a backlash was going to come on an area that was relevant to us. If there was going to be somebody assigned as a spokesperson that would have questions raised about them that would be directed towards us. And GPEX declined that offer, and I don't see any reason why. Because what it would meant was that we didn't learn about it until everyone learned about it. We didn't learn about it until it was public news. And so we were thrust into this situation where people all over the country, people from outside of the party, people from inside the party, were demanding answers from us about a process that we weren't consulted about an appointment that we didn't know about, and that we'd had absolutely no time to prepare for, no time to talk about, no time to, you know, discuss how we might react to it, what our messaging might be. GPEX just left us out in the dark. They didn't care about, you know, the political impacts that would have on us. They didn't even do us the basic courtesy of giving us a 48-hour head start on the news cycle so that we could at least write up a response without it being on the morning hastily. I think that is inexcusable. There's no reason for that. It shows an absolute disregard for us. I think a lot of other liberation groups had similar problems. And I think it just goes to show how, with the current culture of GPEX, they, excuse my French, don't give a fuck about the indie groups. They don't hear from us. They don't want to hear from us. They want us to sit in a corner, shut up, and be token representation for the party when they want to wheel us out. I think it's disrespectful. I think we need to change it.
So to finish with then, on a slightly less serious note than that, a straightforward question: who in the Green Party inspires you the most?
Tina Rothery. She's an absolutely amazing person. I will talk about Tina until the end of time whenever people ask me these kinds of questions. Tina is a really inspirational campaigner. She has given absolutely everything to fighting fracking. The work she's done has been absolutely amazing. She's a lovely woman. she's a real inspiration to me. Like, if I could be half of what Tina Rothery is at any point in my life, I would consider myself an enormous success. She's an absolutely phenomenal person, and I think she's a credit to the party.
I'm sure Tina will be very grateful to hear that. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ash.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that's all we've got for you today. But coming up very, very soon, tomorrow, we should have the next of our interviews, this time with Lindsay McAteer and Daniel Laycock, who are standing for the local party support coordinator role. So do make sure you come back and check that out when it's live. The best way that you can make sure that you don't miss that video when it comes out, you don't miss that interview, is to hit that subscribe button and make sure that you get all the updates on all of our videos in the future. I have a few final things just to say before we leave. So firstly, if you have disagreed with anything Ash has said, if you agree with anything Ash has said, please do pop it in the comments down below and let us know what you think and get a conversation going down there. Voting for these elections will be open in August. So if you're a member of the Green Party of England and Wales, keep an eye on your inbox because you will get a ballot at the start of the next month. And you will be able to vote for all these positions for the candidates that we're interviewing. And the final thing for me just to say quickly is that Bright Green doesn't have any funding from billionaires or big business or media moguls. We only have funding from people like you. So if you've enjoyed this interview, if you enjoyed any of the other content that Bright Green puts out, our articles, our videos and so on, please do set up a regular donation. We ask people to donate just £5 a month. And that means that we can bring you more interviews like this. We can get more articles on our website. And we can cover more things related to the Green Party of England and Wales, the rest of the Green parties in the UK, as well as our coverage on the Labour movement, social movements, and so on. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to Ash, and we'll see you all soon.